Stop the vlogs! Hey guys, it's me, Jack, and I want to take a break from the normal vlog schedule because I want to share with you some tips on how to take photos like this. Namibia was a brilliant place to take pictures of the night sky. It's so sparsely populated that there's very little light pollution, and so you can literally see stars from horizon to horizon. It was insane. So let's cut to the chase. Here are our top 8 tips on how to take your star photography game to the next level.
Hey guys, it's about 5 AM. We got up about 4 AM because the moon is set. The moon is super bright here, and if the moon's set we can shoot some stars. So all 3 of us now shooting some stars, and we'll see how the pictures look.
So the first thing you need to ask yourself is what's going to make this photo interesting, i.e. what is the subject of the photo? And to answer that question, you need to ask yourself what's special about the place you're in, or what's the story you want to tell about the place. For us, that was the car that we were driving around in, which was amazing, driving around Namibia in a 4x4, but also the rock formations that we were camped beside. So we wanted to capture those in our photos of the night sky. If you don't think about your subject, there's nothing that's going to interest your audience and capture their attention. Although night sky photos are impressive by themselves, you really need that subject to raise your game above the rest. But how are you going to capture both a foreground and a background when you're capturing the night sky? And the answer to that is very simple. You just need a light source. And because your shutter is going to be open for quite some time, you only need to expose your subject to that light source for a couple of seconds. So for us, for these car photos, we just exposed our car to a couple of beams of a torch that we had. We also had an LED strip light to illuminate some of the rocks, but you don't necessarily need that. We could have got by fine without a torch, and actually there was no need for me to pack that piece of equipment.
We just setting up a little night shoot up on the rocks. We've heard some jackal howling in the background, we've heard some hyena barking. We know there's spotted hyena in this location, as well as some jackal. And yet we're persisting with the photography.
My second tip is to use a wide angle lens like this one. This is a 10 to 22mm lens, and it's the one I was using in Namibia. The reason for that is that you can keep the shutter open for longer on this lens, which means that you're going to get more light into the camera and therefore better star photos. On a narrow lens, like a 35mm portrait lens, you're going to start to get star trails at long shutter speeds. And that's because the stars take longer to travel across a wide angle lens than it does a narrower lens. So if you look at this comparison of a picture from a 35mm lens and a 10mm lens, you can see that the 35mm lens hasn't exposed the stars as well, and that's purely because the shutter is not open for as long. On this 10mm lens, I was quite comfortably able to keep the shutter open for 30 seconds or more, whereas on the 35mm lens, it was half of that, at about 15 seconds before we started to see star trails. So a wide angle lens is an absolute must if you want to take brilliant shots.
So the other thing you want to remember to do is to set your focus manually. Here, obviously I'm shooting on this 10 to 20. Go as wide as possible here, and you want to make sure the focus is set pretty much to infinity, just a bit below infinity.
Okay, so the next step is you want to make sure your f-stop is pretty low and your aperture is quite wide to allow a lot of light in. However, you don't want it too low because otherwise you're going to have a blurry foreground. And you don't want that if you want a nice crisp photo of foreground and stars. So I would suggest having your f-stop set between 4 and 7.
I've got here a low f-stop to let as much light in as possible, so f4. 15 seconds shutter speed. You don't want it to be too long, otherwise you're going to get the movement of the stars and the stars will be blurry. And ISO 2500. Ideally I would go higher than that, but the 70D is fairly shit at ISOing.
The third part of the puzzle is of course ISO, and this really depends on your camera. ISO is the sensitivity of your sensor or the film that you're shooting with, and you want to try and keep that as low as possible. So for me that was between 1000 and 2000 ISO, but after that for most cameras you're going to start to see grain in the stars. Even on A7R II, which Eliska shoots with, the higher ISOs saw a lot of grain in the stars. You can see in this example how increasing the ISO exposes more light in the picture, but the grain starts to ruin the image. This is an obvious one, but use a tripod. I used a very handy gorilla pod because it's easy to transport, and that did the job completely. No one can hold a camera steady for 30 seconds, and even the slightest shake is going to distort those stars. So definitely make sure you've got a tripod with you. I've made that mistake before.
I'm going to hit remote shooting.
Sixth tip is that you can use an app to also help stabilize the image that you're taking, and that's purely because moving the camera by pressing the shutter is going to slightly wobble the camera potentially when you take that shot, and therefore slightly distort the photo of the stars you're going to take. Most cameras have a Wi-Fi function now, which enable you to use an app to press the shutter remotely. So this is the penultimate tip, and it is to try and shoot in RAW when you're shooting photos of the night sky. The reason for that is that RAW photos and file formats allow you to preserve more data in the blacks and in the shadows, which means in the edit you can bring those shadows up and you get some of that data back, way more than JPEG and other file formats. Finally, you need to shoot over and over again, partly to experiment with the right settings for your camera, partly though it's because you're not going to be able to see anything in pitch black, so your horizon's probably not going to be straight, and also everything that you want to be in the shot is not necessarily going to be in the shot. So we took loads of photos which were completely rubbish because simply we didn't get the framing right. You can see that here. And that is honestly the hardest thing about shooting stars.
Hardest thing is, one, getting up in the morning to do this. 2, being able to kind of get the horizon straight and make sure what you want in the shot is in the shot. The key is to get some good foreground as well, I think. So we've shot the car, shot some trees, I'm going to shoot some rocks now.
Experiment with your settings, make sure you've got a wide angle lens and you're thinking about what you're shooting about, and make sure you've got a stable camera. And that's about it. Keep shooting and you will get it right. Just find a nice dark night to do it on.
Okay, so we got some shots.
Yeah.
Some nice shots of the stars. It's about 5:30 now, so we're going to sleep for another hour or so and then get up before the flies get up, because that's my genuine main concern.
Then get out of here.
Got to come up with a plan for tomorrow to avoid this fly. Right. Good night.
I hope you guys found that useful. Let us know in the comments if you've created any great photos. Love to see that stuff on Instagram. You can check ours out as well. It is @WeFilmThings. Thanks very much for watching, guys, and there'll be more from us from Namibia next.